My daughter cast me out of her home after I refused to bow to her mother-in-law like a servant. The woman was wealthy, and my daughter demanded I serve her plate and then go scrub the bathroom. I shed my tears in silence, but the decision I made afterward left everyone stunned. I am grateful you are here. Listen through my story until the end and share the city you're watching from. I want to see just how far my story will travel. Never did I imagine that my own daughter would strip me of my dignity. At 64 years old, I thought I had already endured every kind of pain life could throw at me. But that evening in Lila's kitchen, as I watched her flutter about preparing for Beatrice's visit, I realized I was mistaken. From the living room, Lila called out her instructions, her tone sharp with nervous energy. "Mom, check the silverware again. Every fork and knife must be perfectly lined." She had already rearranged the flowers 3 separate times, desperate to make the evening flawless. I ran my trembling hands along the polished cutlery, ensuring each piece was aligned. My fingers shook not from age but from the weight of tension pressing down on me. Beatrice Langford, Adrian's mother, was expected for dinner. She was the woman who controlled nearly half the commercial properties in our town, drove a car worth more than most homes, and had always regarded me as an inconvenience in her son's life. At exactly 7 o'clock the doorbell rang. Beatrice never subscribed to the notion of being fashionably late. "Mom, answer the door," Lila whispered urgently, smoothing her elegant black dress one last time. Her words echoed the conversation from earlier that afternoon, one that still burned in my chest. She had sat me down like a child and instructed me with a stern face. Beatrice, she explained, expected a certain level of service whenever she dined. I was to be helpful, obedient, ready to fulfill any request. I opened the door to see Beatrice wrapped in a cream-colored coat that likely cost more than a year's worth of my rent. She was petite, barely 5 feet tall, yet she carried herself with the authority of someone who owned every room she entered. "Mrs. Langford," I murmured, stepping aside respectfully. "Please come in." Without so much as a glance, she handed me her coat as if I were staff. The fabric was heavy and luxurious in my arms, though it seemed to weigh far more than it should. Adrian appeared immediately, kissing his mother's cheek and showering her with praise. Beatrice, settling comfortably into the chair Lila had reserved especially for her, began complaining about road construction near the country club. I stood there awkwardly, holding her coat until, unnoticed, I slipped it into the hall closet. Dinner was served 20 minutes later. I had spent the afternoon cooking Beatrice's favorites: beef Wellington, roasted asparagus, and a rich chocolate soufflé. My feet ached from hours at the stove, but I had wanted it perfect for Lila's sake. When I placed the salad before Beatrice, she spoke my name for the first time all evening. "Nora, this dressing is too tart." My cheeks flushed. "I can prepare another with a lighter vinaigrette," I offered quickly, but Lila cut in before Beatrice could respond. "No need. Mom will just use the bottled ranch from the fridge." The sting of humiliation burned as I fetched the dressing I would never have served on my own table. By the time I returned, Beatrice was deep into a story about her luxury Mediterranean cruise. She praised the service on board, saying the staff anticipated every need before passengers even voiced it. She glanced at me with deliberate meaning as I set the bottle beside her plate. The main course fared no better. She criticized the beef for being overcooked, the asparagus for being underseasoned, even the folds of the napkins I had carefully arranged. Each remark landed like a slap. Yet what wounded me most was hearing Lila echo every complaint. "You're right, Beatrice," my daughter agreed when her mother-in-law noted water spots on the wine glasses. "Mom, please wash these again." My hands trembled as I carried the glasses to the sink, polishing each one with a fresh towel. From the dining room their laughter rang out, slicing through me. By dessert, I felt like a shadow moving through a home that no longer belonged to me. Beatrice lifted her coffee cup expectantly, without words, assuming I would refill it. When her napkin fell, she waited silently until I replaced it. Then came the final blow. Rising to leave, Beatrice smoothed her silk blouse and said, "Nora, before I go, I'd like to freshen up. Please make sure the powder room is spotless." The request struck me like a stone. She wanted me to clean the bathroom, as though I were the household maid. I looked at Lila, desperate for her to step in, to protect me from this final insult. Instead, she smiled and chirped, "Of course, Beatrice. Mom, make sure everything is perfect in there. Check the towels, polish the mirror until it shines." Her words hung like poison in the air. My own daughter, the girl I had raised alone after her father walked away, the woman whose education I had funded, whose early marriage I had supported, was now asking me to scrub toilets for the approval of her wealthy mother-in-law. I stood frozen, all eyes on me. Beatrice waited with thin-lipped expectation. Adrian looked uneasy but said nothing. Lila, impatient, finally snapped, her voice cutting like glass. "She's wealthy, Mom. Serve her properly and then go clean the bathroom. This matters to us." In that instant, something inside me shattered. A fragile piece of myself that had held strong for decades broke apart. Yet I nodded because what choice did I have? After all, this was my daughter's house. Her marriage, her comfort, her carefully crafted life. That was what I was supposedly securing with my silence and obedience. Carrying a small basket of cleaning supplies, I walked toward the powder room. My eyes blurred with tears I refused to let fall. Kneeling on the cold tile, scrubbing the porcelain of the toilet, I could hear the cheerful chatter coming from the dining room. The tension from moments earlier had dissolved, their voices now warm and animated, as if nothing had happened. And then I heard the words that broke me completely. Beatrice's voice, sharp and clear through the thin walls. "She's actually quite useful. So obedient. You've trained her well." A laugh followed, Lila's laugh. Bright, pleased, triumphant. "She knows her place now. It just took some time to get her there." I froze, staring into the gleaming reflection of myself in the water I had just cleaned around. In that distorted image, I no longer saw a mother or a cherished relative. I saw a woman reduced to nothing more than useful. That realization hit harder than any physical blow, and I gripped the edge of the sink to keep myself upright. Was this my future, remaining useful, until the day I no longer was? That night, sleep abandoned me. Each time I closed my eyes, Beatrice's words replayed. "So obedient, trained her well." And behind them, Lila's satisfied laugh, echoing endlessly like a cruel refrain I could not silence. By the time morning light spilled across the sky, I tried convincing myself perhaps I had misunderstood. Maybe Lila had not meant it as harshly as it sounded. Perhaps in daylight we could talk and return to being mother and daughter, not strangers bound only by utility. In the kitchen, I found her lounging in her silk robe, scrolling idly through her phone while her coffee sat cooling. For a fleeting second when she looked up, something softer passed over her expression, and hope flickered weakly inside me. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said carefully as I poured myself a cup from the pot she had brewed. "Thank you for letting me stay last night. I was too tired to drive home." She nodded, barely glancing up. "Beatrice texted me this morning. She was very impressed with dinner." "That's good to hear," I replied, clutching my mug for comfort as I sat across from her. "Lila, I wanted to talk to you about last night." Her scrolling paused. "What about it?" I took a steadying breath. I felt uncomfortable with how things unfolded. The way Beatrice spoke to me, asking me to clean the bathroom, and you supporting her in that. Her phone clattered against the counter as she set it down with too much force. "Uncomfortable? Mom, what exactly are you trying to say?" "I'm saying that I am your mother, not hired help. I was glad to cook and serve dinner, but when she began ordering me about and you encouraged it." "Encouraged it?" Her voice rose, sharp and incredulous. "I was trying to make a good impression on my mother-in-law. Do you not understand how important she is for our future, for Adrian's business?" "I know she matters to you," I said quietly, "but I matter too. I'm your mother." Lila stood so abruptly her chair screeched against the floor. "And as my mother, shouldn't you want what's best for me? Shouldn't you want me to succeed?" "Of course I do. But..." "No buts." She began pacing, the silk of her robe flowing behind her like a banner of authority. "Do you realize what Beatrice can do for us? She has influence with the planning commission, the mayor's office. If she speaks for Adrian's firm, it could mean contracts worth millions." I stared, barely recognizing the daughter I had raised, watching her reduce herself to desperate ambition. "And you think earning those connections means humiliating me?" "Humiliating?" She whirled around, her face flushed. "You call serving dinner and cleaning a bathroom humiliating? Do you know what's actually humiliating, Mom? Having a mother who is so proud, so stubborn, she can't see the bigger picture. Her words felt like open-handed strikes across my face. Lila, please listen to yourself. You're asking me to act like a servant in your home. And you sound like someone too self-important to help her own daughter. She shot back, her voice high and shrill. You know what your real problem is, Mom? You've always been jealous. The word cut through me. Jealous? Of what? Of me. Of my success. My marriage. The life I've built. You never had any of it. Dad abandoned you with nothing. And you've carried that bitterness ever since. You resent anyone who has more than you. Her cruelty left me breathless. How can you say that? I worked 2 jobs to pay for your education. I gave up dating, gave up happiness of my own so you could have every chance. And now you tell me I must pay for those choices forever? You expect me to sacrifice my future because your life didn't go the way you wanted. She snapped, eyes blazing. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I forced them back. All I want is for you to treat me with basic dignity. Dignity. Lila let out a harsh laugh, devoid of warmth. Mom, what do you even bring to this family? You don't have money like Beatrice. You don't have connections or power. All you can give is service. And even then you complain. Her words hammered into my chest, each one heavier than the last. This was my child, the baby I once rocked to sleep, the little girl whose scraped knees I kissed, the young woman whose every dream I fought to nurture. I gave you love, I whispered. A mother's love. Love doesn't pay bills. Love doesn't secure Adrian's future or mine. At that moment, Adrian wandered into the doorway in his rumpled pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, his face tight with unease as his eyes flicked between us. Everything all right in here? Adrian asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Lila turned to him instantly, desperate for an ally. I was just explaining to Mom that she needs to be more flexible when Beatrice visits. Adrian shifted on his feet, uneasy. Your mom seemed tense last night, he said carefully. I mean, Beatrice noticed. Noticed what? I asked, though part of me already dreaded the answer. That you seemed resistant to helping out, Adrian murmured, avoiding my eyes. She mentioned you didn't look very happy serving dinner. I stared at him, disbelief tightening my chest. I cooked for 6 hours. I served every dish. I even scrubbed your bathroom while you all relaxed at the table. But you did it with an attitude, Lila interjected sharply. Beatrice could see you were unhappy, and that made everyone uncomfortable. The words erupted from me before I could stop them. Of course I was unhappy. I was being treated like hired help in my own daughter's home. It's not your home, Mom, Lila said quietly, and the calmness in her tone cut deeper than all her shouting ever could. This is mine and Adrian's home. And in our home we need people who support us, not people who make things harder. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. What are you saying? Lila and Adrian exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken meaning. Then Lila straightened, her expression hard with the determination I had seen her wear in business meetings. I'm saying you need to decide what kind of relationship you want with us. If you want to be part of this family, you need to accept your role. Help when we ask. No complaints. No drama. Make Beatrice feel welcome when she's here. And if I don't? I asked, though my throat was dry. Again their eyes met. This time Adrian spoke, his voice low. Then maybe it's best if you don't come around when Beatrice visits. Maybe you need time to think about what really matters. The room fell into a silence so heavy I could hear the clock ticking on the wall, and the refrigerator humming in the corner. I looked at my daughter, searching desperately for some trace of the girl I had raised, the girl I had sacrificed for. But all I saw was a stranger. So these are my choices? My voice trembled as I whispered. Be your servant or be erased from your life. Lila's jaw tightened. Don't be so dramatic, Mom. We're just asking you to be helpful, to be part of the team. The team, I repeated, the word sour on my tongue. And what part do I play on this team? She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. I saw it written all over her. Her stiff shoulders, her cold eyes, the way she looked at me like a problem to be solved. I was the help. Nothing more. Nothing less. I rose slowly, feeling every one of my 64 years in my aching body. I need to go home. Mom, Lila began, but I held up a hand. I need to think, I said, my voice steady. About what you've said. About what you're asking me to become. I climbed the stairs with heavy steps, gathering my small overnight bag. Behind me, muffled voices whispered, but I no longer strained to hear. Maybe I didn't want to know. In the guest room mirror, I caught sight of my reflection, an old, worn woman who looked defeated. When had I become someone dismissed so easily by her own child? I was nearly at my car when I heard the front door creak open. Mom, wait, Lila called. I turned, clinging to a fragile hope that she might apologize, take back the cruel words, remember that she loved me. Instead, she stood on the porch in her expensive robe, already looking regretful for even stepping outside. Just think about what we discussed, okay? She said flatly. This doesn't have to be complicated. We can still be a family. I looked at her, my beautiful, successful, heartless daughter, and felt something deep inside me shift. The last thread of hope I had been holding finally snapped. You're right, I said softly. It doesn't have to be complicated at all. I got into my car and drove away, leaving her behind on her perfect porch in her perfect neighborhood, with her perfect life. A life with no space for a mother who wanted to be treated as more than furniture. But as I drove back to my small apartment, I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't the end. Something inside me whispered that Lila's carefully constructed world was built on foundations far weaker than she imagined. The first 3 days after leaving her house passed in a haze of sleepless nights and untouched meals. I replayed every second of that dinner, every cruel word from the morning after, trying to understand how my bond with my daughter had deteriorated so far. My little one-bedroom apartment felt like a box I had been locked into and forgotten. The silence screamed around me. For years, even when Lila and I weren't in constant contact, I had always known she was there, just one call away, still part of my life. But now that connection was cut, and I didn't know how to exist without it. I drifted through rooms like a ghost, picking up books I couldn't focus on, starting chores I couldn't finish. The walls pressed in on me, covered with photographs of Lila through every stage of her life. Graduation portraits, wedding snapshots, family vacations, images where we were both smiling, where happiness seemed genuine. Now I couldn't help but question if all of it had been nothing more than a performance. Had she always considered me a burden, someone useful for a time but ultimately discardable? That Thursday morning I sat at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee gone cold. The stillness was broken by the chime of an incoming email. Normally I would have ignored it. My inbox was filled with bills and advertisements these days, but something urged me to check. The message came from Morgan & Associates, the accounting firm that managed the books for Lila's interior design business. Frowning, I clicked it open, wondering why they would contact me directly. Then I remembered. 5 years earlier, when Lila had launched her business, I had helped her set it up. To make things easier, my name had been listed as a secondary contact for financial documents, both because she often traveled for client meetings and because I'd co-signed the initial startup loan. Technically, I was still on paper as a partner, even though I'd never played a role in the daily operations. The email itself was routine, a monthly financial summary, the kind I usually deleted after a quick glance. But on this empty day filled only with loneliness and heartache, I decided to open the attached report. At first, the columns of figures blurred together. Revenue, expenses, profit margins, all the dry metrics of running a business. Then I reached the transaction section, and my chest tightened. A series of deposits stood out, large transfers of $5,000 here, $8,500 there, $12,000 the previous month, all originating from an account labeled H. Langford Personal. Beatrice's funds were flowing directly into Lila's business. My pulse quickened as I stared at the screen. When had Beatrice become an investor? In all our discussions about company growth, Lila had never once mentioned accepting financial backing from her mother-in-law. Yet the deposits were regular and substantial, stretching back nearly 8 months. The timing felt suspicious. They seemed to increase right around when Lila began insisting I cater more to Beatrice during her visits. Curious and unsettled, I opened older reports. The pattern was undeniable. Consistent transfers from Beatrice's personal account into Lila's company. But there was no sign of formal agreements, no contracts, no partnership documents, Nothing that would usually accompany such significant financial involvement. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone. I still knew people at the bank where Lila had set up her accounts, contacts from when I had assisted her in the beginning. They might be able to clarify. I dialed a familiar number. Mrs. Lynn, this is Nora Valdez. I'm listed as Lila Valdez Morgan's business partner. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Grace Lynn, who had overseen Lila's accounts since the start, was a kind woman in her 50s. Nora, what a nice surprise. How are things with the business? She asked warmly. I tried to steady my tone. That's why I'm calling. I was reviewing our recent financial reports and noticed several deposits from H. Langford. I just want to ensure everything is properly documented. A brief pause followed. Ah yes, the Langford transfers. Those have been fairly regular. Is there an issue with documentation? That's the concern, I replied carefully. I don't see any records of investment agreements or partnership arrangements connected to those deposits. I just wanted to confirm nothing important was overlooked. This time the silence stretched longer. I'm reviewing the notes, Grace said finally, her voice more cautious. According to our records, those transfers are listed as family contributions rather than formal investments. Lila explained they were gifts from her mother-in-law to support business expansion. The words made my blood run cold. Gifts. That was the official record. Substantial sums of money, recorded not as loans or structured investments, but as personal contributions. I thanked Grace and ended the call, my thoughts racing. Gifts from Beatrice? That didn't add up. Everything I had witnessed about their dynamic told me Beatrice was neither generous nor selfless. She was demanding, controlling, and calculating, someone who kept track of every favor and expected repayment with interest. At that dreadful dinner, when she barked orders and treated me like staff, I'd seen how much she relished power. Could such a woman really be handing out thousands of dollars each month without expecting control in return? The rest of the day slipped away as I combed through every report available. A darker picture came into focus. The transfers had begun small, $2,000 here and there, but steadily increased in both size and frequency. They didn't match business growth or milestones. Worse, much of the money wasn't staying in the company account. Instead, it was redirected to what appeared to be personal accounts. Funds that should have fueled Lila's business expansion were supporting an extravagant lifestyle. One detail unsettled me most of all: the timing. The largest deposits coincided with periods when, according to Lila's public social media posts, Beatrice had been traveling or struggling with health concerns, moments when an older woman might not closely monitor her finances. I pushed back from the desk, nauseous. Surely it wasn't what it appeared. Lila couldn't be stealing from her mother-in-law. She might be ambitious, perhaps cold, and often placed money above relationships, but theft? Could she truly be capable of that? I tried to reason through possibilities. Perhaps Beatrice had chosen to invest privately, without paperwork. Maybe she wanted to support both Lila and Adrian personally, easing their financial burdens. There could be some innocent explanation for why so much money was funneling into Lila's accounts without formal agreements. But in my heart I knew better. The way Lila had bent over backward to impress Beatrice, how insistent she had been that I catered to every demand, how desperately she worked to maintain a bond that brought her little real joy. It all began to make sickening sense if she was siphoning money from the woman. And then another thought chilled me even deeper. That dinner where Beatrice treated me like household staff, barking orders while Lila stood by, no, not just stood by, but encouraged it. What if that humiliation had been intentional? What if Lila had been carefully shaping a dynamic where Beatrice felt powerful, in control, the benevolent benefactor who deserved to be worshipped? What if my degradation wasn't accidental at all, but a deliberate piece of the illusion? I closed the laptop and wandered to the kitchen window, pressing my palms against the cool glass as I looked out over the parking lot of my apartment complex. The sky hung heavy, gray with unshed rain, mirroring the oppressive weight inside my chest. My daughter wasn't simply ungrateful or cold. If what I had seen in those financial reports was true, she was a thief, stealing from an elderly woman while hiding behind the shield of marriage and family loyalty. And worse, she had made me part of the ruse. By ordering me to serve, to scrub, to bow my head and act as though Beatrice was a revered matriarch, Lila had used me to maintain the illusion. Beatrice felt respected and powerful. Lila secured the funds, and I had been the convenient tool that tied the whole deception together. My humiliation hadn't been a side effect of her ambition. It had been essential to her scheme. Pressing my forehead against the cold glass, I finally let the tears fall. They weren't only for the fractured relationship with my daughter, but for the dawning horror of who she truly was. The child I had raised, the woman for whom I had sacrificed endlessly, was no daughter at all. She was a stranger. Worse than a stranger, in fact. She was someone I would avoid if she weren't bound to me by blood. Yet as the tears dried, something colder than grief began to surface. If Lila believed she could use me as a prop in her con to defraud Beatrice, she had gravely underestimated me. I might be older, I might be alone, and I might have allowed myself to be humiliated in the name of family peace, but I would not stand idle while she destroyed the life of an innocent woman. Beatrice needed to know exactly what kind of daughter-in-law she had welcomed into her family. Sleep abandoned me after that revelation. I spent the night staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles, whispering excuses, searching desperately for another explanation. But each time I closed my eyes, I saw those numbers again. $47,000 over the course of 8 months, draining from Beatrice's personal account into Lila's business without contracts, agreements, or any legitimate business rationale. By Friday morning, I knew speculation wasn't enough. If I was going to Beatrice, I needed proof that no one could dismiss. With grim determination, I brewed coffee and opened my laptop. If Lila was stealing, she would have left traces. Even clever thieves always left some kind of breadcrumb. As a listed partner, I still had login credentials for the company's banking portal. My hands shook slightly as I typed the password, expecting the system to block me. But the account opened without resistance, displaying real-time activity. What I saw nearly made me drop my mug. The theft was far more extensive than the summary suggested. Beatrice's deposits weren't the only issue. There were also cash withdrawals and transfers to personal accounts that had nothing to do with legitimate expenses. Money came in from Beatrice, and then flowed out again to cover personal indulgences. For 2 straight hours I combed through records, cross-checking every date. A $3,000 withdrawal aligned perfectly with photos Lila had posted from a luxury spa weekend. An $8,500 transfer to Adrian's personal account showed up days before their anniversary trip to Napa Valley. Thousands more in unexplained cash withdrawals, each with no justification connected to business operations. Still, one question gnawed at me. How exactly was Lila gaining access to Beatrice's funds? That puzzle brought me back to something Beatrice had mentioned at dinner, words I had dismissed at the time. She had praised Lila for helping with confusing financial matters, saying how comforting it was to have a young, clever woman handling her complicated accounts. Back then, I thought it was simply condescension. Now the implication was darker. Had Beatrice entrusted Lila with direct access to her finances? Determined to test my suspicion, I dialed a number I hadn't called in months. Riverside Country Club's member services. "This is Nora Valdez," I said smoothly, projecting confidence. "I'm calling on behalf of Mrs. Beatrice Langford. She asked me to confirm a few details about her recent account activity." It was a gamble, but I knew how clubs like that operated. Staff were accustomed to assistants or relatives making inquiries for wealthy members. The voice on the line responded without hesitation. "Of course, Miss Valdez. How can I assist you today?" "I'd like to verify whether Mrs. Langford's automatic payment arrangements are still active," I continued carefully. "She's been a little uncertain lately about which expenses are being drawn directly from her accounts." The woman on the line spoke briskly. "Let me pull up her file." "Yes, here we go. Mrs. Langford has several automatic payments already in place. Her monthly membership dues, spa services, and dining minimums are all deducted automatically. Was there a specific charge she was unsure about?" I forced calm into my voice. She mentioned something related to business expenses. She wasn't certain if those payments were still being withdrawn. A pause followed, heavier than before. "I don't see any business-related payments on our system. But Mrs. Langford did mention that her daughter-in-law now manages most of her personal finances. It might be best to confirm directly with the bank." When I ended the call, my heart was pounding so hard it made my hands tremble. The truth was settling in, undeniable now. Lila was handling Beatrice's finances personally. That was how the transfers flowed so seamlessly, and in such carefully calculated amounts. Beatrice had entrusted her daughter-in-law with access, perhaps even power of attorney, believing she was getting help. And Lila was exploiting that trust in the worst way imaginable. The rest of the morning I spent quietly making inquiries, each time posing as a representative or family assistant. Piece by piece, the full picture emerged, and it was devastating. Lila's authority wasn't limited to one account. She had broad privileges. She could authorize transfers, manage investments, pay bills, move money as though it were her own. On the surface, the arrangement had logic. Beatrice was in her 70s, traveled often, and might reasonably need someone younger to help track complicated financial matters. But Lila wasn't just helping. She was orchestrating a scheme. The deposits weren't careless or impulsive. They were designed with precision. Amounts adjusted to appear natural, scheduled at times when Beatrice would be distracted or unavailable, categorized in ways that seemed benign if ever noticed: family support, business development. It was methodical, deliberate theft masked as responsible financial management. What shattered me, though, came not from the bank but from Lila's own words. Through cross-referencing profiles and some determined searching, I stumbled onto her private social media accounts, the ones she assumed only her close circle could see. And there, stretching back almost a year, were posts dripping with cruelty. "Managing the old lady's money is easier than I thought," she had written 6 months earlier. "She barely notices where it goes, as long as she feels important and respected." 2 months ago. "The trick is to let them think they're generous. Play up the wealthy matriarch fantasy, and they'll bankroll whatever lifestyle you want." And the one that made my stomach heave: "Sometimes I can't believe how easy this is. She actually thanks me for helping with her finances. If she only knew, she'd probably keel over. LOL. I stared at those words, horrified. This wasn't weakness, wasn't someone sliding into bad choices under pressure. This was calculated predation. My daughter mocking her victim, reveling in the deception. Then came the final blow. As I printed screenshots of those vile posts, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed Adrian's office number. "Mrs. Valdez," a woman's professional voice said. "This is Tessa from Adrian Morgan Architecture. I apologize for disturbing you, but we've encountered a payment issue we hoped you might clarify." My pulse spiked. What sort of issue? She hesitated. "For several months, we've been receiving large payments from a Mrs. H. Langford. They usually amount to around $4,000, marked as architectural consulting fees. But Mr. Morgan hasn't performed any work for her, and our records show no contracts or projects connected to her name." The blood drained from my face. "These deposits are going straight to Adrian's firm?" "Yes, ma'am. We've been holding them aside, unsure what to do. Mr. Morgan keeps promising to review the situation, but with his travel schedule, well, the irregularities concern us. Altogether, the payments total roughly $28,000 over the last 7 months. We need to either return the funds or provide documentation for services that were never rendered." I ended the call with trembling hands. It wasn't just Lila. Adrian was in on it too, accepting money directly from his mother, disguised as consulting fees for work that never happened. Husband and wife, united in systematically robbing the woman who trusted them. The rest of that day, I worked like someone possessed. I gathered banking records showing Beatrice's funds funneled into Lila's business. I printed screenshots of Lila's gloating posts. I documented phone logs, withdrawals, and transfers that linked the stolen money to vacations, spa indulgences, and luxury expenses with no connection to business operations. By evening, my kitchen table was covered in a neatly organized dossier, a mountain of evidence outlining financial elder abuse too detailed to ignore. But as I sat there, staring at the proof I had compiled, I felt something heavier than fury. Sadness settled into me, deeper than I had ever known. I thought of the child I once cradled in my arms, the little girl whose nightmares I chased away, the young woman I supported through every hardship, even when money was scarce and sacrifices cut deep. I had wanted her to be strong, capable, and successful. Never had I imagined she would become someone who preyed on the vulnerable. The woman who had ordered me around in her kitchen, who had reduced me to a servant in front of her victim, that woman was no daughter of mine. She was a stranger wearing my child's face. Beatrice, though, wasn't a stranger. She might be difficult, exacting, even harsh, but she was an elderly woman deserving of protection, not exploitation. I stacked the evidence, slid it into a manila folder, and set it squarely on the table before me. Tomorrow, I promised myself, I would drive to Beatrice's estate and place the truth directly in her hands. She needed to know what kind of family she had allowed into her life. Whatever it cost me personally, the deception had to be exposed. Because the daughter I had once loved was no more. The woman living under her roof, bearing her name, thriving on stolen funds, that was no daughter of mine. And I would not shield a criminal, even if she had once been my child. The drive, though only 40 minutes in reality, stretched endlessly in my mind. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, while the manila folder sat heavy on the passenger seat beside me, like a weapon waiting to be used. Sleep had barely touched me the night before, my mind rehearsing endless versions of the confrontation. Would Beatrice take me seriously, or would she dismiss me as a bitter mother-in-law stirring drama? Would she hear me out before calling her staff to escort me away? Each time hesitation crept in, I remembered the venom of Lila's words online, her mocking joke about Beatrice suffering a heart attack if she knew the truth. That cruelty hardened my resolve. The Langford estate rose behind tall iron gates, 15 acres of manicured perfection hiding whatever ugliness lurked inside. I had only visited once before, at Lila and Adrian's engagement party 3 years earlier, and even then I'd felt like a trespasser among the marble statues and imported roses. Now, pressing the intercom, my chest pounded with dread. "This is Nora Valdez," I announced, steadying my voice. "I need to speak with Mrs. Langford regarding an urgent family matter." The reply came clipped and formal. "Mrs. Langford isn't expecting visitors today. Please tell her it concerns Lila and Adrian," I pressed. "It is of utmost importance." Another pause, then the iron gates groaned open, swinging wide with mechanical precision. I guided the car along the winding driveway, past hedges cut to geometric perfection, past a fountain that likely cost more than I had earned in 5 years combined. The house itself loomed at the end, a sprawling Georgian colonial with white columns and rows of gleaming windows. Beatrice met me at the door, her cream cashmere sweater immaculate, her silver hair styled to perfection, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. She looked every inch the commanding matriarch, though behind her poise flickered an unmistakable wariness. "Nora," she said evenly, "this is unexpected. I trust nothing has gone wrong with Lila and Adrian?" "That," I answered softly, "is exactly what I need to discuss. May I come in?" A flicker of hesitation passed across her face before she stepped aside. "Very well. Let's sit in the drawing room." Inside, the sitting room was as I remembered, lavish furnishings arranged with perfect symmetry, portraits of grim ancestors staring down from gilded frames, and fresh-cut flowers placed in vases that probably cost more than my rent. Beatrice lowered herself into a high-backed chair that resembled a throne, motioning for me to sit across from her, leaving deliberate distance between us. "Now then," she said, folding her hands primly in her lap. "What is this urgent matter?" My fingers trembled as I opened the folder. "Mrs. Langford, I need to show you something. I stumbled across this by accident, but I've spent the past week verifying every detail. I wish I weren't the one telling you, but the truth is unavoidable." I drew in a breath. "Lila and Adrian have been stealing from your accounts." Beatrice's expression froze, her eyes narrowing. "Excuse me. For the past 8 months," I continued, steadying my voice, "they've been funneling thousands of dollars from your personal accounts. They disguise the transfers as business investments and consulting fees." I slid the first set of papers across the polished table. Bank statements showing transfers into Lila's design business, totaling over $47,000. Beatrice leaned closer, her sharp eyes scanning the pages, though her face betrayed little. "This shows support for Lila's business," she said carefully. "I've been helping their ventures. That is not theft." "With respect," I countered. "Did you personally authorize these transactions? Did you know this money wasn't fueling business growth but was instead funding spa retreats, vacations, and luxury shopping?" I spread out more documents. Account records cross-referenced with Lila's social media posts. Photos of getaways perfectly aligned with large withdrawals and transfers. Color began to drain from Beatrice's cheeks as she studied them. Adrian told me he required funds for a significant project just last month, she murmured, voice cracking. He insisted it was time-sensitive and would strengthen both his firm and our family holdings. Mrs. Langford, I said gently but firmly, I contacted Adrian's office yesterday. His firm has received $28,000 from your accounts under the label of architectural consulting fees. But there are no contracts, no projects, no record of work. His own employees don't understand why money keeps arriving for services that were never provided. Her hand trembled as she picked up one statement, scrutinizing it through tear-bright eyes. I don't understand. Lila told me these were investments. She said everything was for the family's benefit. She was attentive, so very helpful. That is how financial exploitation works, I explained softly. They earn your trust, weave themselves into your daily life, and then slowly increase their control over your money. Please look at these. I passed her the printed screenshots of Lila's private posts. Beatrice's hands shook violently as she read her daughter-in-law's smug words. About the old lady's money, about making her feel generous and adored while siphoning funds away for indulgence. The silence that followed seemed to press down on the entire room, heavier than any words either of us could summon. Beatrice stared at the papers spread across her spotless coffee table, her breath short and uneven. At last she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Lila had called her the old woman and even joked that she might have a heart attack if she ever discovered the truth. I apologized softly, knowing how painful this must have been. But Beatrice's grief quickly shifted into something harder. When she raised her eyes to me, they burned with anger I hadn't expected. Her voice grew stronger as she said they had made a fool of her, in her own house at her own table, pretending she was a generous benefactor while they secretly emptied her pockets. I told her there was more. The way they had treated me, ordering me to serve and clean during that dinner, hadn't been random cruelty. It was part of the deception, meant to make her feel like a powerful matriarch, so that giving them money would seem natural, like an act of generosity from a wealthy patron. Her expression changed again, this time a mix of rage and realization. She saw clearly now they had used both of us, and I warned they had no plans to stop. Beatrice stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked her manicured gardens. When she turned back, her face was set with determination. She asked me how much in total they had taken. I checked my notes before answering. From what I could confirm, about $75,000 over the last 8 months. But I admitted there could be more, given how carefully they had hidden things. She nodded grimly and said she wanted to confront them that very night. I suggested she speak to a lawyer first, but she refused. Her voice was like iron as she said she wanted to see their faces when they realized their game was finished, to show them she was not as helpless as they believed. She went to an antique desk, took out her phone, and said she would call them now, inviting them to dinner under the pretense of financial matters. I urged her to be careful, but she was certain their arrogance would bring them, convinced it was yet another chance to take advantage of her. She dialed and I listened as Lila's cheerful voice came through, full of false warmth. Beatrice spoke calmly, asking her and Adrian to come to dinner at 7 o'clock. She emphasized it should only be the 3 of them, not Avon. Lila hesitated briefly, then agreed. When the call ended, Beatrice looked satisfied. They were coming, still blinded by greed. She wasn't finished, though. She planned to call her lawyer, her banker, and her accountant, ensuring there would be real consequences when the truth came out. Then, unexpectedly, her expression softened. She turned to me and apologized, saying she now understood how I had been used and humiliated at that dinner. She admitted she had been wrong to treat me that way. Her words brought tears to my eyes. She asked if I would stay for dinner, to witness how it ended. I thought of the day she had once made me scrub her bathroom, but now she was offering me a place at the table where justice would be served. I quietly agreed. 7 o'clock arrived with the weight of a sentence being carried out. From Beatrice's sitting room, I watched Lila's sleek BMW glide up the driveway. My stomach churned as I saw my daughter and her husband step out in expensive clothes, likely bought with Beatrice's money. Adrian straightened his designer tie, and Lila smoothed her silk dress as they walked to the front door, confident and composed, unaware of what was waiting. That afternoon Beatrice had spoken with her lawyer and her accountant, preparing everything to ensure this confrontation had consequences beyond words. She had also instructed me to wait in the study, close enough to hear but out of sight. She reminded me that they needed to understand their scheme had succeeded not because their victims were weak, but because we had trusted them. The door opened and I heard Lila's bright, artificial greeting full of charm. She thanked Beatrice for the invitation, and Adrian quickly added that they were always glad to help with financial matters. Their voices drifted toward the dining room, smooth and practiced, unaware that their reckoning had begun. Beatrice had set the dining table with her finest china and sparkling crystal, as though it truly were an ordinary family gathering. The irony struck me immediately. My own daughter was about to face her downfall served on dishes worth more than my car. "I hope you don't mind," Beatrice said evenly, "but I've asked my lawyer to join us later by phone. There are certain documents I'd like us all to review together." "Documents?" Lila's voice carried the faintest trace of unease. "Investment papers, account authorizations, things like that," Beatrice explained. "I've been trying to organize my financial matters better. You know how scattered I can be." Adrian laughed lightly, a sound that made my skin crawl. "Scattered? Not at all, Mother. You've always been very sharp in business." "Have I? Sometimes I'm not so sure," Beatrice replied. "Lately I've noticed transactions in my accounts, large transfers I can't quite remember approving. The details are getting fuzzy." I held my breath, waiting. "That's perfectly normal," Lila answered smoothly. "You handle so many accounts and investments. That's why you asked us to help keep track of things, remember?" "Yes, I do recall asking for help," Beatrice said slowly. "But I don't recall asking for this much help." The air seemed to chill instantly. Tension pressed through the walls of the room. "I'm not sure I follow," Adrian said carefully. "Oh, I think you follow perfectly," Beatrice replied, her voice suddenly sharpened, stripped of any pretense of confusion. "You understand exactly how much you've been helping yourselves to my money." The silence that followed was crushing. "Beatrice." Lila's pitch rose, brittle and defensive. "I don't know what you believe. I believe you've stolen over $75,000 from me in the last 8 months," Beatrice said coldly. "I believe you've used your access to my accounts to bankroll your lives, while pretending to be loving family. I believe you're thieves." A chair scraped against the floor. Adrian's voice was tight with strain. "Mother, that's a very serious accusation. If there's been some mistake with the transfers—" "There has been no mistake," Beatrice cut him off, her tone freezing. "I have bank records, transaction histories, documentation of every dollar you stole. I even have screenshots of your social media posts, where you laugh about how easy it is to manipulate the old woman, and joke about me having a heart attack if I ever found out." The sharp crash of glass followed. Someone had dropped a wine goblet. That was my moment. I rose from the study and entered the dining room, the manila folder in hand. Lila stood rigid beside the table, her face drained of color, staring at Beatrice as though she had seen a ghost. Adrian sat motionless, mouth slightly open, unable to speak. Between them, red wine spread like blood across the pristine white cloth, seeping from the shattered crystal. "Hello, Lila," I said quietly. Her head snapped toward me, eyes blazing with panic and fury. "What is she doing here?" she demanded, whipping back to Beatrice. "She's the one who discovered what you've been doing," Beatrice replied calmly. "She brought me evidence because, unlike some, she still has a conscience." Lila's face twisted with rage. "She's lying. She's trying to turn you against us, just because I refused to let her treat you like a servant." I nearly laughed at her boldness. Even now, caught in the act, she tried to rewrite the past. "Actually, Lila," I said, "you insisted I treat Mrs. Langford as if she were my employer. You demanded I serve her dinner and clean for her. You told me she was rich and that I should know my place." "That's not what happened." "It's exactly what happened," Beatrice interrupted firmly. "And now I see why. You wanted me to feel powerful and superior so I wouldn't question the money I was supposedly giving you. You made me believe I was a generous benefactor, while you robbed me blind." Adrian finally spoke, his voice desperate. "Mother, please. If you'll just let us explain." "Explain what?" Beatrice snapped, her anger now unrestrained. Explain how you stole from your own mother? Explain the fake consulting fees you created to funnel my money into your accounts? Explain how you mocked me behind my back, laughing at the thought of my heart failing while you drained me dry? I opened the folder and spread its contents across the table. Bank statements, screenshots, records of the fraudulent payments. It's all here, I told them. Every transaction, every lie, every cruel joke at Beatrice's expense. Did you really think no one would ever catch you? Lila's shock had shifted into bitter fury. She hissed at me. You jealous, bitter old woman. You couldn't stand that I built a good life, so you're trying to ruin it. You ruined it yourself the moment you chose to become a thief, I answered sharply. You didn't provide services. You stole $75,000. You mocked her as the old lady and laughed at how easily she could be manipulated. Adrian looked from his mother to his wife, panic written across his face. Mother, if some transfers happened improperly, it wasn't my doing. Don't, Beatrice interrupted, her voice deadly quiet. Don't you dare pretend innocence while shifting blame. Your own firm has been receiving payments for work that never existed. Even your staff called to question the false consulting fees. Adrian's expression collapsed. The fight drained out of him. He knew it was finished. Finally, Lila spoke, her voice small, stripped of confidence. What do you want? Beatrice's lips curved into a smile, cold and sharp as glass. I want my money back. Every dollar of it. I want both of you to sign written statements admitting exactly what you've done, Beatrice said firmly. And you need to understand that from this moment forward, you will never again have access to my finances. And if we refuse? Adrian asked, his voice low. Then my lawyer files criminal charges tomorrow morning, Beatrice replied without hesitation. Elder abuse, theft, fraud. You'll both be facing prison. The strength drained out of Lila at once. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked around the room like a trapped animal, desperate for a way out that didn't exist. How much time do we have? Adrian asked quietly. 72 hours, Beatrice said. Return the money and sign the admissions, or the police will become involved. I studied my daughter's face as the truth settled in. This was the same woman who had once humiliated me in her kitchen, who had told me my only worth was as a servant, who had cut me off because I refused to play that role. And now it was her turn to face humiliation, forced to answer for her cruelty and greed. I thought I would feel triumphant, vindicated. Instead, sadness filled me. No matter what she had done, this desperate woman was still the child I had raised, the daughter I had once loved so deeply. Even with the knowledge of her betrayal, a part of me grieved for the person I had believed she could become. But stronger than the grief was something I had not felt in many years: self-respect. Across the wreck of the dinner table, Beatrice met my eyes. In that moment, I didn't see the imperious woman who had once ordered me to scrub her bathroom. I saw a fellow survivor, someone who had also been twisted and used by my daughter's schemes. Nora, she said with formality but also sincerity, I owe you more than I can ever say. Not just for uncovering this theft, but for showing me that I deserve more than to be surrounded by people who only see me as a source of money. Lila looked between us with something close to horror. For the first time, she realized she had lost more than a victim. She had created an alliance between the two women she had tried to set against one another. Mom, she pleaded, tears in her eyes. Please. I made mistakes, but I'm still your daughter. Don't let her destroy our family. I held her gaze for a long time. I thought of the little girl who used to climb into my lap when she was frightened, of the young woman who once called me for advice about everything, from career choices to what to cook for dinner. Quietly I answered, you destroyed our family the day you decided I was only valuable as a servant. You lost me as your mother when you chose to see me as a tool for your schemes instead of a person deserving respect. 3 months later, I sat in Beatrice's sunroom, reviewing applications for the property management position she had offered me. It wasn't as an employee, but as a partner in overseeing her extensive real estate holdings. It was work that acknowledged my intelligence, valued my experience, and compensated me fairly. Lila and Adrian had returned most of the stolen money and signed the admission statements to avoid criminal prosecution. Their marriage hadn't survived the scandal. Within weeks, Adrian had filed for divorce, claiming his wife had manipulated him. They lost their house, their cars, and nearly all of their luxury possessions in order to repay what they had stolen. In the weeks that followed, Lila called me several times, sometimes apologetic, sometimes angry, but I no longer answered. There was nothing left to say. For the first time in decades, I finally had what had been missing from my life: dignity. The right to be treated with respect, to have my contributions recognized, to exist as more than someone else's convenience. Beatrice and I built an unexpected friendship, one rooted in mutual respect and the strength of survival. We were two women who had been used and dismissed, and who had chosen not to accept that treatment any longer. I was 64 years old, and for the first time in decades I was truly free. Now I wonder about you, the one listening to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you faced something similar yourself? Leave a comment below. And while you reflect on that, I'll leave 2 more stories on the final screen. They're favorites on this channel, and I promise they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the end.